Okay, fifth grade. This is going to be the first lesson that I read to you like this. You of course are going to need your social studies book. Just so you know, these are just going to be me reading. I might throw in a little piece of information here or there, but it's not going to actually like help you with the lesson. And aside from making it easier for you to follow along, maybe. So you don't have to watch these videos. Okay, these are just meant to help you. Okay. This is the fifth grade. This is a fifth grade lesson, so if you're in fourth grade, you don't have to listen unless you just absolutely want to hear my voice for whatever reason, which weird. I am doing this from my house, if you hadn't already noticed, so you might possibly see my wife at some point. She's up here with me. Yeah, there you go. I've got lots of cats and a dog that might somehow end up in the video. You never know. So if you hear any noises or whatever, just don't worry about it, and we'll just keep on going. So, with that being said, we need to go ahead and open up to page 568. World War II begins. Should look like that. And we'll go ahead and get started. World War II begins. I will know the events that led to World War II. We've got 5 vocab terms for this lesson: dictator, fascism, Axis, allies, and Lend-Lease Act. Let's go and look at our picture at the top of page 568. It was December 1941. The American naval base in Hawaii had just been attacked by the nation of Japan. After World War I, the United States returned to its pre-war policy of isolationism. That's where they just try to stay out of everything. It chose not to get involved in foreign affairs. It even reduced the size of its armed forces. Americans wished never to go to war again. But events in Europe soon drew the United States into another global conflict. Dictators rise in Europe. The Great Depression of the 1930s had caused hard times everywhere. People in some countries blamed their governments. They began looking for strong leaders to take control and fix the problems. Some even turned to dictators. A dictator is a ruler who has total power over a country. One such dictator was Benito Mussolini of Italy. Italy had been one of the victors of World War I, so they had won. But the country had lost many lives in that war. It had also lost a lot of money and had gained little from the Treaty of Versailles that had ended the war. This angered many Italians. Mussolini came into power in 1922. His party was called the Fascists, which gave us the word fascism. Fascism is a movement that gives all power to the government and does away with individual freedoms. It uses the military to enforce laws. Mussolini took control. He banned elections and ended free speech. So obviously he was a very big dictator. An even more dangerous dictator was Adolf Hitler. He and his political power, the Nazis, gained control of Germany in 1933. The Nazis turned the country into a fascist state. Hitler was its supreme leader, so whatever he wanted, he got. Germans too were unhappy with the Versailles Treaty. It stated that they were guilty of starting World War I. It had forced Germany to make payments to the victors of the war. It had also taken away some of Germany's land. Hitler vowed to get back that land and more. To do so, he began rearming Germany and increasing its troop levels. So, in order to kind of make things right for the people of Germany and in order to get back a bunch of land that they had lost, he was going to build an army and use the army to kind of take back that land if needed. The Axis and the Allies. Mussolini set out to expand Italy's territory. In 1935, he took over the African country of Ethiopia, then made an agreement with Hitler. The two fascist countries planned to conquer other countries. They called their new alliance the Axis. Japan would later join the Axis. By 1937, Japan had invaded China and controlled much territory in the Pacific. Starting in 1936, German armies began taking lands that the nation had lost in World War I. The leaders of Britain and France urged Hitler to stop his aggression, so trying to take things over, but they did not try to block him. The British and French people did not want to go to war again. Britain and France were known as the Allies. In 1938, Germany took control of its neighbor, Austria. In 1939, Hitler prepared to invade Poland. Britain and France said they would fight if Hitler went ahead with his plans. In September, Nazi forces moved into Poland. The Allies then declared war on Germany. World War II had begun. The Germans easily defeated the Polish army. They're a lot bigger. A few months later, Hitler decided the time was right to invade France. First, his armies defeated the smaller and weaker countries west and north of Germany. British troops sent to block the Germans were forced to retreat. In May, the German army swept across northern France all the way to the English Channel. Then, in June 1940, German forces struck the heart of France. The French capital, Paris, fell. It's the place where the Eiffel Tower is, if you didn't know. In less than 3 weeks of fighting, Germany had conquered France. Italy now declared war on the Allies, too. The United States debates going to war. Great Britain now stood alone against Hitler. The British defense of their island nation is called the Battle of Britain. It took place mostly in the air. For months, night after night, German planes dropped bombs on London and other British cities. British fighter planes shot down many bombers, but the pounding continued. They managed to kind of escape a lot of the bombings by hiding in subways. Britain's Prime Minister, so kind of like the President, Winston Churchill asked United States President Franklin Roosevelt for help. Many Americans still wanted to stay out of the conflict. With the Atlantic Ocean between them and Europe, they felt secure. Others, though, feared what might happen if Hitler were able to defeat the British. What would keep him from attacking the United States? Roosevelt decided to take action but still remain neutral. In September 1940, he sent Britain 50 old destroyers, a type of warship, to help defend its coastline. Then, in March 1941, Roosevelt signed the Lend-Lease Act. This bill allowed the United States to sell, lend, or give ships, planes, tanks, and other equipment to the Allies. Many Americans worried that this action would draw the country into war. So Americans aren't quite fighting in the war just yet, but they're still giving equipment to, one of the sides. And so people are starting to worry that America is going to end up in the war, and people are going to be upset with America if things continue. Meanwhile, Congress passed the Selective Service Act. This law required more than 1 million young men to serve in the military by the fall of 1941. So we usually call this the draft. The United States built up its Army, Air Force, and Navy. So the way a draft works is they just kind of pick, I want to say it was birthdays. And if your birthday just happened to be picked, you had to go to war. The attack on Pearl Harbor. By the spring of 1941, the British had won the Battle of Britain. The Germans had been stopped at the English Channel, but in the Pacific, Japan was steadily grabbing more land. It now controlled much of China and Southeast Asia. Japan depended on the United States for many of its resources, including oil. But in July 1941, Congress banned all trade with Japan. As a result, tensions rose between the two countries. In Japan, the military ran the government. Leading General Hideki Tojo believed that the United States Navy stood in the way of Japan's complete control over East Asia. Japan decided to attack the United States Pacific Fleet. On December 7, 1941, Japan launched a surprise attack on the United States Navy base at Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. The first Japanese bombers arrived early in the morning. They had taken off from the decks of aircraft carriers far out at sea. The Japanese sank or damaged 18 American warships and destroyed nearly 200 planes. More than 2,300 soldiers and sailors from the base died. On December 8th, President Roosevelt told Congress this.
President, Mr. Speaker, members of the Senate, of the House of Representatives, yesterday, December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy. The United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan.
That same day, Congress declared war on Japan. The attitude of Americans quickly shifted. Now most of them supported joining the war. Germany attacks the Soviet Union. Before we get too far into this, just to kind of clear up what we're going to be talking about, the Soviet Union was what Russia used to be called. Hitler's armies had easily moved west across Europe, but all that time Hitler had his eye on a large area of rich farmland far to the east. The land was in Russia, then called the Soviet Union. In 1941, Hitler would try to claim it for Germany. The Soviet Union was ruled by Joseph Stalin. Stalin, himself a brutal dictator, did not trust Hitler. In 1939, he and Hitler had made an agreement not to attack each other. That agreement had allowed Hitler to send his full forces west to conquer France. He did not have to worry about fighting the Soviet Union on a second front in the east. So he was kind of able to focus on taking over just one place at a time. He didn't have to worry about fighting back so much. The pact, or the agreement, had also left Stalin free to invade Finland, which he did in 1940. In June 1941, Hitler broke the agreement with Stalin. He began an invasion of the Soviet Union. Hitler sent 3 million German troops, backed by 3,000 tanks and 2,500 planes, against the Soviets. The Germans destroyed much of the Soviet army and forced the remaining Soviet troops to retreat. As the Soviets retreated, they burned crops and destroyed railways and factories. If you kind of remember what William Tecumseh Sherman did during the Civil War, where he just completely destroyed everything in his path to stop the Confederate forces from using those things, that's what the Soviets did here. The goal of this scorched earth policy was to leave nothing behind for the Germans to claim. Scorched earth means that you just completely destroy everything. The Germans still pressed forward. By November, they had nearly reached Moscow, the Soviet capital. Stalin needed help. He had never been friendly with Britain or the United States. He was a dictator and all that. But now he was forced to turn to them for equipment and supplies. The United States, through the Lend-Lease Act, gave the Soviet Union a loan of $1 billion to buy what it needed. Soon, the Soviet Union would become an important member of the Allies. The Soviet scorched earth policy slowed the advance of the German army. Then, the Soviet winter, with its heavy snows and bitterly cold temperatures, stopped the Germans completely. Soviet forces were able to drive them back. In a few months, the Soviets had pushed the German troops well away from Moscow. And that's it for today, so y'all have a good day.